The New York Jets just suffered an extremely tough loss against the Minnesota Vikings. It was a game where despite two first-half interceptions by Aaron Rodgers, the Jets still had a chance going into the final 2 minutes of the game. But then a costly interception by Rodgers that we'll get into later cost them the victory, and they fell to a 2-3 record to start the year. Going into the season, I feel like most people would have considered the Jets to be a playoff or bust kind of team. In this video, I'll be breaking down the Jets' early season struggles and analyzing their chances of making a postseason run this year. And later on, I'll also be forecasting the future of the Jets if they do wind up missing the postseason. But first, let's take a look at why the Jets are struggling so much to start the year. Like I just said, the Jets had every opportunity to win this Sunday. The Vikings just kept giving them chance after chance to get back into this game, but they couldn't capitalize. Let's look at this play right here. This is 3rd and 6, and the Vikings are up 3-0 at the end of the first. After going 3 and out on their first 2 drives, the Jets were awarded an opportunity in opposing territory after a Sam Darnold fumble. The Jets really need to get something going offensively here. You can't just go 3 and out again and fail to capitalize on a Vikings mistake. So watch what happens here. The Vikings are going to show pressure and have 7 guys lined up on the line of scrimmage. And watch the linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel on this play. Van Ginkel was drafted by the Dolphins while Brian Flores was the head coach, and now he followed Flores to Minnesota. And he fits right into this defense, and it's because of plays like this right here. He disguises himself like he's gonna blitz. So Rodgers thinks he can hit Garrett Wilson on a slant route right here, but then he drops back into coverage and makes a great catch in return for the first touchdown scored in London. This was a really great defensive play by Van Ginkel, but it was also the worst possible outcome for the Jets. Then again on the following drive, it's 3rd and 8, and Rodgers forces this ball to Allen Lazard, and it sails way over his head, and it gets easily intercepted by the safety Cameron Bynum. So next thing you know, the first quarter ends, and the Jets haven't gotten a first down and have thrown 2 interceptions, including a pick 6. This is obviously not a winning recipe. Being on your heels immediately in the first quarter is not going to equate to very many wins. But despite the Jets struggling to start the game, the Vikings offense also struggled immensely throughout the day, and Darnold looked like he was coming back down to earth. Darnold completed less than 50% of his passes and threw this interception in the 4th quarter right here, and the Jets marched down the field and scored a touchdown to bring the deficit to just 3 points. The Vikings then only scored a field goal on the following drive, which meant that Aaron Rodgers was going to get the ball back with 3 minutes remaining, needing a touchdown. If this was Rodgers from 2012 to 2020, we know this game would be over. But instead, this was the play that ended the game. Rodgers is going to try to do something here that he has always done well, and that's attacking one-on-one coverage on the outside. We've seen him and Davante Adams, who I'll be talking about later, do this hundreds of times. But this time, it gets intercepted by Stephon Gilmore, ending the game for the Jets. Now, Kurt Warner, who was the color commentator for this game and who also knows a whole lot more about football than I do, had to say this after the game-losing interception by Rodgers.
We know that Aaron Rodgers loves to make the back shoulder throw. Been working and teaching these guys to look quickly in those situations. And you see Mike Williams' head came late. Good coverage by the savvy veteran right there, holding him off. And what's he do? Get your head turned, find the football, knowing what Aaron Rodgers likes to do is throw it quick. He locates it, the receiver does it, and a nice catch to finish the game.
Now, while I agree with Warner that Mike Williams was very late to turn his head around, and if he did, maybe he could have been in a better position to catch the ball or deflect it away, but I still think this is poor ball placement from Rodgers right here. If he was going for a back shoulder throw, wouldn't he want to put this ball high and away so that either Mike Williams catches this ball for a first down or it goes incomplete and out of bounds, and you get to try again on 4th down? But instead, he put the ball low and inside, which allowed Gilmore Gilmore to be in perfect position to intercept the ball. Unless maybe he was expecting Williams to break inside, but it doesn't look like that was the plan here. But maybe you guys can help. Let me know in the comments, do you think this interception was more on Rodgers or Mike Williams? This game was terrible for the Jets offensively as a whole. They had to pretty much abandon the run game as they only ran 14 times for a total of 36 yards, which led to Rodgers attempting 54 passes, and that simply just cannot happen at this point in his career. This offense hasn't had a true rhythm all season, and they beat arguably the two worst teams in the NFL at this point between the Titans and the Patriots. But outside of that, they got dominated in week 1 against the 49ers, who look pretty suspect right now. They failed to score a touchdown against Denver, who wound up winning the game despite Bo Nix completing less than 50% of his throws for a total of 60 yards through the air. And then they once again lost to a team who had a struggling offense, but because of the huge offensive mistakes that I highlighted, they lost this game. Losing games like these in this type of fashion is simply not a characteristic of good football teams. Good teams win close games and capitalize on mistakes by the other team. And that's something that the Jets simply have not done all year. So do the Jets have a chance of making the playoffs? To answer that, there's a lot of things to consider. First, Aaron Rodgers is not his old self anymore, and with each passing week, it feels more and more like he's becoming a shell of what he once was. As much as it hurts me to say, it's just the truth. Rodgers has a career low in passing yards, passer rating, and yards per attempt throughout the first 5 games of this year, and is on pace to throw 24 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, which would be the most interceptions that he's thrown in his 20-year career. And while Rodgers has certainly been an upgrade from Zach Wilson, this Jets offense as a whole is not that much better than it was through the first 5 games of last year. They were 2-3 last year through the first 5 games, and threw less yards and had a worse passer rating, a worse completion percentage, and less touchdowns. But this year, they've allowed more sacks, and they can't get anything going on the ground as they're averaging way fewer yards per carry on pretty much the same amount of attempts. Which is kind of surprising because you'd think with Aaron Rodgers back there, defenses would have to prepare more for the passing game, which would open up a lot of opportunities on the ground, but that just hasn't been the case. But the worst stat of all is that this offense's 18.6 points per game is the same exact points per game throughout the first 5 games of 2023. And that's just not what the Jets were expecting from an Aaron Rodgers-led offense. For them to be putting up the same amount of points as a Zach Wilson-led offense is just plain awful. Now, I won't lie, I would be very surprised if the Jets looked like this throughout the entire year. I have enough confidence in Rodgers to at least figure out something and start scoring some points. He hasn't played a full season since 2022, and he didn't play the entire preseason. There inevitably was going to be some growing pains during the first quarter of the year. But the thing is, I don't know if they'll turn it around quick enough to make a playoff run. They still have to play the Bills twice, the Steelers, who are always tough to beat, the Texans, the sneaky good Cardinals, the Colts, who are a tough team to beat, the Seahawks. They play the Dolphins twice late in the year, who will probably have Tua back by then, and they play the Rams late in the year, who will have gotten healthy by then as well. I'd say as of right now, they win 3 to 4 out of those 9 games with how they've been playing. But there is one thing that this team can do that would give them a shot at making the playoffs. And you all know what I'm about to say. If the Jets successfully trade for Davante Adams, they will have a shot at making the playoffs. I think with Adams, they win 6 out of those 9 games that I just mentioned. We all know Aaron Rodgers likes his guys. It's the only reason why Allen Lazard is still on the roster and why Nathaniel Hackett still has a job. They even had Randall Cobb last year because he's a Rodgers guy. And there's never been a better Rodgers guy than Davante Adams. With all due respect to Jordy Nelson, Adams is by far the best receiver that Rodgers has ever played with. And they miss each other dearly. And now, given that Davante Adams has told the Raiders that he prefers to be traded, it seems more likely than ever that there will be a reunion between these two great players. Adam Schefter has reported that the Raiders would be willing to trade the star wide receiver in exchange for a second-round pick and some other compensation. The reports also say that the Raiders are willing to be patient and wait for a good offer, and they do not not want to have to eat the contract in the trade, meaning they want the other team to take on Davante Adams' deal. Now, while they are the favorites to land Adams, they certainly won't be the only team submitting offers to Vegas, as reportedly the Saints, Steelers, Ravens, and Bills have all inquired about a potential Davante Adams trade. But the Jets, they need to find a way to get this trade done. Yes, they might be mortgaging their future, and they might have to ask Adams to restructure his contract in order for it to work. But Rodgers has absolutely no chemistry with any of these receivers right now. And they have to go all in on making a Super Bowl run with Aaron Rodgers, or else a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. So speaking of guys losing their jobs, less than half an hour after I recorded this entire video, it was announced that the Jets fired Robert Saleh. My main thoughts are that they fired the wrong coach. We all know Robert Saleh controls this defense, which has been spectacular ever since he's gotten there. And even though they lost in London to the Vikings, it certainly wasn't because of the fault of the defense. They held Darnold to below a 50% completion percentage, and he had about half the passer rating that he's been averaging the entire year. It was simply because of this offense that they lost that game. And it's because of the offense that this team isn't where they want it to be. So they really should have canned Nathaniel Hackett. But we all know he's Rodgers' guy, so he's not going anywhere. Overall, this doesn't change my thoughts about their chances at making the playoffs. I still think as constructed right now that they don't have what it takes. But if they go out and get Davante Adams like I mentioned, then they might have a chance. But overall, my stance on the Jets doesn't change after the Robert Saleh firing. Which leads me right into, what does the Jets' future look like if they miss the playoffs this year? Well, that means they're kind of stuck. They'll probably wind up cleaning house and firing Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas, and probably begin preparing for yet another rebuild. The only problem is that Rodgers is still under contract for at least one more year. So what do you do then? Do you find a way to cut or trade Rodgers? Do you just hope he retires? Or do you use him as kind of a bridge quarterback and take a quarterback in the first round this year? I'd personally say Rodgers isn't going to retire because he's competitive, and given the fact that he's still under contract, I'd expect him to return for another year. Unless he goes on another ayahuasca darkness retreat and the mushrooms tell him to retire. But in the event that Rodgers returns for another year, as an organization, you have to focus more on the future rather than hoping that Rodgers turns back the clock at 42 years old. I think if they like one of the guys coming out of college this year, they shouldn't hesitate to take their guy of the future. But if they do make the playoffs and they come close to making a Super Bowl run, then they should just gear up in the offseason and free agency and go for the Lombardi. And with that said, that's going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as it will go a long way in helping me create the best quality NFL content for all of you. And in the comments, let me know, do you think the Jets will make the playoffs this year? And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.